Welcome to the Raise 'em Up podcast, brought to you by the New Mexico Boys and Girls Ranches. As always, I'm Heath Cull. Due to some recent restrictions, we're not doing this the way we used to do it, so if the audio is different or if you're missing Ted, just let me know. But brings us to our subject today, COVID-19, the coronavirus. Seems like over the last few weeks we have gone from a fairly normal and fairly mundane lifestyle to a train wreck of everybody trying to figure out what to do next. At the time of recording this, most states have gone into a stay-at-home order where people are required to stay home. School has been canceled throughout the end of the year. Graduations have been canceled. I've got one in college that was going to graduate in May and one in high school that was going to graduate in May. Both of those have been canceled. And parents are taking over the task of performing school. The new principal and the new teacher, a little different than they were a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So everybody's kind of having to adjust to this. And I think it's important that we, as parents, recognize what our obligation is to our children during this time. We don't always realize it, but the kids that we're around are taking all of their cues, emotional cues from us, and they're kind of trying to figure out how they feel about what's going on based on seeing how we feel about what's going on. So if we're freaking out, they're freaking out. And one of the skills we try to practice at the ranches all the time is to practice not freaking out. There's an appropriate response, and staying home and not going out and limiting your exposure to things and only going out for essentials. That's an appropriate response. Buying 900 rolls of toilet paper and making sure there's nothing left on the shelf for anyone else is probably not an appropriate response. And kids are paying attention to that. The other thing about it is if we're not prepared, or we were kind of surprised or caught off guard by the idea we were going to spending 8 to 10 hours a day with our kids in a school format, it can be an adjustment period for both us and the kids. My kids are a little older, so I am not dealing with young kids who are trying to figure out why they're not going to school or who don't always understand the situation around them. But even for my kids, it's getting up and, oh yeah, I get to see just y'all again today. So it is a little difficult for everybody to deal with this social distancing and to deal with not going out, and a little bit of a infringement on our freedoms on how we do things. And how we handle that and how we teach our kids to handle that will ultimately decide how this goes for them and it goes for us. And so couple things that I'd like to stress is you have some options during this time to reset your relationship with your kids while they're home. You don't have to go into this stressed out panic mode. You can start doing fun adventures. You can start doing different chores. You can start restructuring how you want things done. You can develop a different routine. All of these are helpful ways in getting kids to be in a position where this is less of a big deal. But as the adults, we have to have a plan, and then we have to work that plan. The old saying that I grew up on with is plan your work and then work your plan. And in this scenario, that makes a lot of sense because we can say we're going to structure this a little differently. I'm going to communicate a little bit more. In these kinds of situations, being more communicative is very helpful. There's not a lot of situations where being less communicative with kids is helpful, but in this situation, more communication is better. Charts are helpful. Check-off lists for chores and things like that can be very helpful. And then starting your day with a fun activity. Scavenger hunts of finding things around the house that start with a certain letter. Or just starting the day off with an art project, doing some kind of drawing or some kind of activity like that, and then going into school. What we don't always realize is that our kids are going to school and they're in a stressful environment for them, and then they change and everything is different, and that's stressful just in and of itself. So we can make that a little different by saying we're going to reset, and admitting that you're having to reset. Admitting that you may not remember the math from your ninth grade year of high school. Admitting that you're having to adjust to the structure and those kinds of things can really help ease that because you can talk about it. I also recommend at the end of the day, checking in and saying what was the best part of the day and what was the worst part of the day. And then, for the love of God, pay attention to what they say. If they come in and say, what I really appreciated was starting the day off with, a little bit of an activity, then do another activity the next day. If they say the worst part of the day was our scavenger hunt, then maybe that's not the best plan. But you can adjust to it together, and kids will give you a little leeway if you ask for it. If you say, this is stressful for everybody, and I would like to make this as the best experience possible, but I'm not a teacher. I'm having to learn on the fly how to make this work. those are scenarios where we can sit with our kids and say, hey, I'm not in my comfort zone. You're not in your comfort zone. Let's cut each other a little bit of slack and move on from there. The other thing is there's a lot of resources that people aren't aware of. With a little bit of searching on the internet, you can find a whole lot of resources for your kids and for what they're going through, and for answers to stuff that they're struggling with. And you can be in it with them, as opposed to, you go do this and I'll stay over here and do that. One thing kids of all ages, even us adult ones, really like is when we're in it with someone, when we're able to experience that new challenge or new way of life for a little while with someone, instead of experiencing it at the same time in the same room as somebody, but not feeling like we're in it with them. The last thing I'll say is, please just turn off the news. I'm okay with scheduling my news. I typically get up and read news. Reading news is different than listening and watching news. I read news articles. I read a lot of things, not all of which are just breaking news. And then I typically check what's going on with all the things related to the health crisis at about 4:30 in the afternoon. And again, I'll read it. And then sometimes we watch the evening news, sometimes we don't. And then one of the things that is helpful is to go out and look for positive stories, or look for things that are going on that aren't being as glorified right now. You can hear a lot of criticism of professional athletes and things like that, but you can also find stories of professional athletes giving up money to keep arena workers employed, or paychecks coming for a while. And you can do those things in an effort to balance out some very difficult news that's going on. And I don't want to minimize how difficult that news is. It's a difficult time. But you can balance that out with looking for some positive things that are going on in our world at the same time. The world didn't stop. It just got severely limited, and there are things going on. And if you go searching for them, and if you make it a challenge with your kids to go searching for those good things that are going on, you can actually help yourself, because you can fill your own cup a little bit with some of this more positive stuff that's going on. A lot of jokes are being made about prayer in school and even spanking returning into this crisis. I don't think that's the best way to go. I think if you're a religious family and you add some things that are memorizing Bible verses, or educationally looking at some Bible verses, I think that's great. But I think the tension that we bring into it is going to be returned by our kids, so we don't have to bring a ton of tension into it, because we don't really want them to bring a ton of tension into it. Use this time to actually get back to knowing your kids, talking about things. There's not a lot else to do. It's not like you have a lot of distractions going on. You guys can sit down as a family and talk about what's going on, talk about how you're processing it, talk about how this is impacting you. I know that my oldest daughter freaked out a little bit, because every sneeze she had and every cough she had, she thought for sure she was getting sick. She worked herself through it, and she got on the other side of it. But that's something that as a family you can talk through, and you're there to support them. And what we realize in this time is that we are not there to support our kids during their normal school day. And now we're having an opportunity to do that. And sometimes it's stressful, sometimes it's very difficult. And littler ones, I'm talking about the 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds there's a lot of challenging moments with them, because they're so curious and so active. But the other part of that is that you can bring them into your world as much as you're jumping into theirs, and you can have a conversation about some things that maybe you haven't talked about before. You can talk about all of the things that are going on in the world, but you don't have to scare everybody all the time with everything. There's a lot of good going on in the world. There's a lot of scary things going on in the world, but you're the main news source for your children. And if you take that role seriously and you prepare for it, and you have conversations and you present some balance to it, you can walk your kids through this difficult time with hopefully a whole lot more emphasis on family and connection when this is over. And that's really what we're after, is that connectedness. So I encourage you this week, if you're struggling, reach out to somebody. If you're needing a little more interaction than you've gotten from an adult, find somebody that'll FaceTime or video chat with you. You're welcome to call us here at the ranch, and we can set something up if you're looking for some advice or somebody to talk to. We will be more than happy to help out in this time. We're kind of locked down in the middle of nowhere and doing very little, so we feel you. But at this time in your life, and this time in your kid's life, you have the opportunity to lead in your family, and you have the opportunity to set the tone and set the weather and set the emotional forecast for how things are going to happen. If you take that responsibility seriously, your kids will come out of this with a little better understanding of you, and you'll have a little better understanding of them, and hopefully you can move forward together better after this is over. So that's my advice. Thank you for joining us on the Raise 'em Up podcast. We'll be back again next week. Thank you.